It's a strange sign of the times when someone who has done everything by the book can still find themselves facing a felony. That's exactly the reality for an Army veteran and former Indiana Special Deputy named Vontae Garrett. Recently, Garrett was pulled over while driving through Ohio. What should have been a routine stop quickly turned into a nightmare, leaving him in handcuffs and charged with improper handling of a firearm in a motor vehicle. The twist: Garrett not only had a valid lifetime concealed carry license from Indiana, but he was also traveling through a state that has adopted constitutional carry. On paper, he was doing everything right. Yet here we are, staring at a case that once again shows how fragile rights can be when laws are enforced inconsistently. To fully understand why this feels like déjà vu, we need to go back to 2022. That year, Garrett was at the center of another high-profile case in Toledo, Ohio. He had been out at a bar and grill with his family when an entirely different group of men, intoxicated and belligerent, began harassing him. It wasn't harmless heckling either. According to reports, they threw objects, shouted threats, and followed him after he left. Most alarming, they pulled guns on him and his family. In that moment, Garrett did what many lawful carriers hope they never have to do. He drew his weapon and defended the people he loved. The entire scene was captured on security footage. That footage confirmed what Garrett had claimed all along. He acted in self-defense. And yet, the system still dragged him into court. Instead of being immediately cleared, Garrett was arrested and charged. He then spent 9 grueling months in jail awaiting trial. 9 months behind bars for protecting his family in a situation where any reasonable person would have felt their life was in danger. Think about that. Almost a year of his life lost, not because he committed a crime, but because the gears of the justice system grind slowly, and often at the expense of those caught in its path. When his day in court finally arrived, the evidence spoke louder than the accusations. Garrett was acquitted. The verdict confirmed what the video already showed: he was the victim, not the aggressor. But acquittal didn't erase the 9 months of confinement. It didn't give back the sleepless nights, the lost opportunities, or the way his name was splashed across the media as if he were a criminal. The scars from that ordeal never really disappear, and in many ways, they set the stage for what was to come. The outrage over Garrett's prolonged imprisonment in 2022 helped spark conversations in the Ohio legislature. Lawmakers introduced House Bill 233, the Self-Defense Protection Act. The purpose of that bill was straightforward: if someone is accused of a crime but has evidence that clearly shows they acted in lawful self-defense, they should have a mechanism to present that evidence early, before being forced into lengthy pretrial detention. It was designed to prevent exactly what happened to Garrett: months of punishment before even having the chance to prove innocence. Unfortunately, the bill never left committee. It stalled, gathering dust, while real people continued to face the consequences of a system too rigid to account for obvious cases of self-defense. Fast forward to now, and once again Garrett finds himself entangled in another legal mess. This time, the circumstances were far more mundane than a late-night bar altercation. He had recently purchased a used car and was driving it back to Indiana to complete registration. The plates on the car were still from the previous owner, and during his trip through Ohio, a deputy flagged the vehicle as stolen. Garrett was pulled over, questioned and explained the situation. The officer verified the information, and the supposed stolen car accusation was resolved right there. At that point, the stop should have ended. But it didn't. Instead, the deputy asked Garrett whether he had a firearm in the vehicle. Garrett, as a former law enforcement officer and a man who has always carried legally, answered truthfully. Yes, he had a firearm. He also explained that he possessed a valid lifetime concealed carry license from Indiana, a license that Ohio is legally bound to recognize. In Garrett's mind, he was simply complying with the law and doing the right thing. Ohio requires permit holders to notify officers when they are carrying if asked, and Garrett was well aware of that requirement. He thought that by being upfront, he would avoid trouble. That honesty backfired. Instead of acknowledging the license, the deputy arrested Garrett and charged him with a felony. The charge: improper handling of a firearm in a motor vehicle. Under Ohio law, drivers and passengers are generally prohibited from having a loaded firearm within immediate reach unless it is properly stored. But here's where things get messy. There is a clear exemption for individuals who possess valid concealed carry permits. Garrett had such a permit. More than that, Ohio's Attorney General has explicitly stated that permits from all 50 states are recognized here. That should have been the end of it, yet Garrett still ended up in handcuffs. His account of the event afterward was filled with frustration. He explained that he had tried to be proactive to avoid any misunderstanding by telling the officer about his license right away. But, in his words, he wasn't hearing it. The deputy was uninterested in what the permit meant or in the reciprocity agreement that Ohio has with Indiana. Instead, the law was interpreted in a way that turned a lawful carrier into a suspect. For Garrett, the stakes are high. This isn't a minor infraction or a fine. It's a felony. If convicted, he could face up to a year in prison. And just as troubling, a felony conviction would strip him of his right to own firearms for the rest of his life. He would instantly be reclassified as a prohibited person under federal law. For a man who has served in the military, worked in law enforcement, and already suffered one drawn-out wrongful prosecution, the irony is staggering. What makes Garrett's story so alarming is not only what happened to him personally, but what it says about Ohio's gun laws. On paper, the state is a constitutional carry jurisdiction. That means residents and visitors alike should be able to carry without a license. At the same time, Ohio still enforces older statutes that restrict how loaded firearms can be stored in vehicles. The result is a tangled web of overlapping rules that can be interpreted in ways that contradict each other. For someone like Garrett, that confusion became a trap. The law being cited against him prohibits loaded firearms from being accessible inside a vehicle unless they are in specific types of storage. Yet in the same statute, there's an exemption for anyone holding a valid concealed carry permit. Garrett had that permit. Ohio's Attorney General has clearly published that permits from all of 50 states, including Indiana, are honored. There is no ambiguity on the books. The only ambiguity is in how the law is applied on the ground. This is what makes the case so disturbing. Garrett did everything that the law required. When asked, he informed the officer that he had a firearm. He showed that he had the proper documentation. He acted with transparency. And yet, despite following the rules, he was punished. If he had stayed silent, that would have been a crime. By speaking up, he still ended up charged with a felony. It is the very definition of a lose-lose situation. State Representative Josh Williams, who is also Garrett's attorney, has been outspoken about this contradiction. He argues that the state is effectively criminalizing both silence and honesty. By his reasoning, every lawful gun owner in Ohio could be vulnerable under the same logic. If this interpretation holds, then simply being a responsible concealed carry holder could put you at risk of arrest. That is not only absurd, it undermines the very purpose of constitutional carry. For Garrett, the consequences could be severe. A felony conviction carries a potential sentence of up to 1 year in prison. Beyond that, it would permanently revoke his rights under federal law. He would be classified as a prohibited person, unable to own or possess firearms for the rest of his life. That's the same category reserved for violent felons and dangerous offenders. Yet, here it could be applied to a veteran and former law enforcement officer whose only mistake was telling the truth. It's a painful irony. Garrett already spent 9 months behind bars in 2022 waiting to clear his name after acting in self-defense. He was acquitted, but the scars from that ordeal remain. Now he faces the possibility of losing his freedom again, and this time not because of a violent encounter, but because of a technical interpretation of a poorly written statute. That possibility weighs heavily not only on him, but on anyone who carries in Ohio. And that is the broader issue. Garrett's arrest sends a message that no gun owner wants to hear. If the law can be twisted like this, then nobody is truly safe from prosecution. The entire premise of constitutional carry is that responsible citizens should not have to jump through endless hoops to exercise their rights. Yet here, those rights are being eroded in practice. If this can happen to a man with a recognized lifetime permit, it can happen to anyone. Gun rights advocates across the state have taken notice. Many are rallying behind Garrett's case, seeing it as a test of whether Ohio will stand by its own laws. Williams and others are working to draft clarifications to prevent this kind of abuse. The push is to ensure that reciprocity agreements are honored consistently and that vehicle carry restrictions are modernized to reflect the realities of constitutional carry. Without those changes, lawful carriers remain at risk of arbitrary enforcement. This isn't the first time Garrett's name has been tied to potential reform. His 2022 ordeal inspired the introduction of House Bill 233, the Self-Defense Protection Act, which aimed to give defendants a way to present evidence of lawful self-defense earlier in the process. That bill never left committee. But now, with Garrett once again caught in the crosshairs of conflicting statutes, there may finally be enough momentum to act. Legislators will be under pressure to resolve the contradictions, not only for Garrett's sake, but for every person who travels through the state exercising their rights. Until then, Garrett waits. He is out on bail, but the threat of prison and the loss of his rights looms over him. The weight of the state has come crashing down on a man who, by all appearances, was doing exactly what the law required. And if it can happen to him, then the promise of constitutional carry in Ohio rings hollow. That's why stories like this matter. They remind us that rights are only as strong as the willingness of those in power to respect them. When the law is written one way but enforced another, citizens are left defenseless not against criminals, but against the system itself. It's a dangerous precedent, and it deserves attention. So don't let this story fade away. Talk about it, share it, keep it alive in the public conversation. The more attention cases like this receive, the harder it becomes for prosecutors and lawmakers to ignore the problem. Garrett's fight is not just his own. It's a fight that every lawful gun owner should be watching closely. As always, stay alert, stay safe, and keep standing up for your rights. Happy shooting,